Hi, and welcome to Becoming Unstoppable Fitness and Weight Loss. We're your coaches, Lynn and Stephanie. We are just two ordinary girls who were born without skinny jeans. We were determined to become fit and fierce, and now we're coaches who get to share our passion for health and strength with others.
We started this podcast so we could share the knowledge and insights that have helped many clients with an even larger audience. And our dream is to help you become unstoppable.
Today in episode 6, we're going to be talking about macros, which is short for macronutrients, and it is a mystery for a lot of people. So hopefully we're going to clear up some of that mystery today. And Stephanie and I are going to start out talking about macros and explaining exactly what they are.
So macronutrients there's two types of nutrients, macro and micro. We're going to focus on the macronutrients today. And it's divided up into 3 groups. So not as crazy as you thought it would be. There is fat, carbs, and protein. So with those 3, when it comes to fat, what we're going to focus on is unsaturated fats. And then when it comes to carbs, we want to focus on complex carbs. Those 2 are going to give you more health and nutritional benefits. And then when it comes to protein, we want to focus on choosing lean proteins when it comes to food. So an example of a lean protein would be turkey or chicken breast, even lean cuts of pork, certain lean cuts of steaks like a filet mignon, which I love. And then things you'd want to avoid more are like, hamburgers tend to have high fat content in their meats. So when it comes to choosing protein, you want to choose the proteins that have less fat in them, and you can just check the back of the label to see if there's higher or lower fat. And then when it comes to fat and carbs, examples of some healthy fats are nuts, avocados, certain oils like olive oil are healthy fats for you. And then when it comes to carbohydrates, some healthy carbohydrates are going to be vegetables, of course. And with those, you also, it's a little better to focus on the non-starchy ones. We want to ideally have, like broccoli, greens, carrots, colorful stuff is great. Starchy ones tend to not have as much color in them, but it can depend on the vegetable. And we want to kind of avoid the breads and the flour-filled things for carbs. So that's just a quick little simple breakdown of those. There's more we can get into in a later episode, but for now, as we introduce these, we want it to be simple because sometimes a lot of people can be very intimidated when it comes to macros, or especially if they're trying to track macros. It seems very intimidating, but it's just really three main things you need to focus on.
Yeah, and I think it's really useful to explain to people instead of like shoulding people at home, because we don't want to should anybody, kind of explaining the why behind it. So when we talk about unsaturated fat versus saturated fat, it has to do with your heart health. And then when we talk about simple versus complex carbs, it's how quickly your body digests the sugars. So a complex carb is going to give you a much more stable energy than a simple carb. And then for the fat, it again relates to, the protein, the lean protein versus the fatty protein, it again relates to heart health. And so, rather than just discussing healthy, we want you all to understand why. There is a reason behind eating one way versus another. So it's, energy, it's longevity, all of those things that we're aiming for.
Absolutely.
And then how do you know what percentage is right for you?
So it might depend on your activity level, or also just how your body functions best. And sometimes you learn what your body needs the most. It's a little bit of trial and error. Overall, you can pretty easily go into a solid group, I would say, or general amounts or percentages to break it up into, but people respond differently to having a little more fat or a little less carbs or vice versa, more carbs, less fat, or adjusting the protein a little bit. For example, I know when I'm training for like an ultra marathon obstacle race, I definitely eat different. I need more carbohydrates, and I kind of take away from the fat and do a little more on the carb side. And then when it comes to wanting to build lean muscle, you'll focus a little bit more on protein. But then beyond that, everybody's body can respond a little bit differently to different foods, so they can adjust a little bit with that as well.
Yeah, I think a good starting point for me and most of my clients, I am a nutrition coach and mindset coach, and Stephanie is a fitness coach. So we both have a lot of experience coaching people in this area. I think a good place to start is, well, for me and my clients, as I said before, like 30% protein, 20% fat, and then 50% carbs. And you can, like as Stephanie was saying, you can totally play around with that according to activity levels, you know, body chemistry, etc. But just to give you an idea of, you know, a place to start, I think that's a useful proportion. What do you normally recommend for your clients?
I think that's a great starting point, and it just depends what the goals are. If it's for, you know, wanting to build more muscle, I definitely give them a bump up on protein. And if it's prepping for a race, then it would be upping the carbohydrates. So it really depends on someone's personal goals. But when it comes to weight loss, that is a great breakdown. You want a sufficient amount of protein. When it comes to weight loss, that's going to be a win for you. So that's a great place to get started.
Yeah, and sometimes even just focusing on your protein can make a huge difference on the scale and in your overall satiety and just the way you feel, your energy levels. So sometimes that's a great place to start, is just starting to really focus on lean protein.
Absolutely. I will say, especially when it comes to women, the majority of women just do not eat nearly enough protein, and that is kind of a task to overcome at first. And once you take that on, I think, at least for me mentally in the past, it made weight loss a little bit easier to focus more on, am I getting enough protein versus like, am I starving myself enough mentally?
Right.
Obviously you don't want that mindset, but focusing on that, yes. I feel like is like, so it's not about what you're not eating, it's about what you're eating.
Intentionally getting enough protein. That's really good. So I know we differ on this a little bit, and that's okay. I like to eat my protein. A lot of people like to drink their protein. It's not effective for me. It ends up creating more hunger when I drink protein shakes. But for some people, it is effective. I know Stephanie does. A lot of trainers do, actually. So I think it's just something that you can play around with yourself and see what works for you. But I think it's really great to be aware it might not work for everybody.
Absolutely. And I will say food first is always the ideal. I do it out of convenience and timing more than anything. So I think it's a great option. But I will say number one is always legit food is probably your best source. So I definitely understand the perspective of steering away from them.
So what are some of the signs that let's go back to, how do you track? What are some useful tools for you?
So writing it down is great, but something that's going to make it really easy, and I've used, is MyFitnessPal. It has most items in there. You can like scan them, and it can give you like a calorie breakdown. You have to make sure you have the serving done correctly. And that's another big thing, is if you are starting to track, you have to make sure your measurements are correct. I've had a lot of clients make that mistake and not realize their portions are what they are. And then when they actually start measuring it, they're like, oh, that's a lot less than I thought a cup was of rice or whatever.
Yeah, or maybe like it's a smaller chicken breast or larger chicken breast than I thought. It's just really useful to start tracking in the beginning. Mm-hmm. So looking at your labels, your packages, like weighing, it might be a little bit tedious at first, but it's just a process that you have to go through to learn like now I know, oh, this chicken breast has 26 grams of protein. Like it will come naturally to you at some point, but there is a little bit of a learning curve that might be tedious in the beginning, but you're learning a new skill, and it's totally worth it.
Oh, absolutely.
So you use MyFitnessPal, which I think, yeah, in the beginning I did too. For my clients, I just recommend like kind of sensing your way there. So we start out with veggies, protein, and fat 3 times a day, and then just kind of making adjustments according to your satiety and energy levels. But, you know, there are more than one way to skin a cat. I'm not saying either way is right or wrong at all. I have used MyFitnessPal and it is useful.
Yeah, and I'll say if you are eating, you know, high protein, lean proteins, and vegetables most of the day, you're not going to have a problem. If you're eating all the right things, and then, you know, learning when you're full, because I did it on Lynn's program and it works that way too.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do want to focus on tracking, that's a very useful tool. And I know sometimes it helps me to just refocus, to just physically have it in front of me.
Yeah, definitely. So what are some of the signs that you're out of balance? Like that you're eating too many carbs or even too much protein or too much fat?
Yeah, with carbs, it's usually that I'm constantly like craving more, particularly if they're like more simple carbs like sugar.
Okay.
I notice that like I don't feel as full and I want more, and that's really more from the sugar than anything.
Yeah.
But I notice that I'm not as satiated, and I want to keep eating. So if I'm going out of control with carbs, I feel myself wanting to keep going. Whereas if I know I'm getting sufficient protein and fat, I usually feel full and happy, and I don't constantly think about wanting to eat. That's one thing.
Yeah. I'm thinking, sorry to interrupt, but I'm thinking about even when I tried going vegan a few years ago, and I just wanted to try it out to see how my body responded. But I know I was never full. Like even on vegetables, you can get into that cycle of like never being satiated.
So that's a huge thing. So remember, I did mention like that goal of is like we talked about like making sure you eat enough protein. When you focus on that, you're gonna start to feel fuller, so it's gonna feel good too as you go along, even though it might seem tedious at first. And then another thing I notice is if I'm like doing too many carbs is my focus isn't as good and my performance is not if it's too many carbs. If I'm working out extra, training for an event coming up, I usually need that extra energy, but it has to be the right types of things, more like, you know, like oatmeal is an uncommon one I'll go to, or fruit with that as well, for training, doing a lot of extra work, so not necessarily on a regular basis. And
when she says training, she means like ultra marathons, you know, training for a half marathon, regular marathon, running long miles, long bike rides, that kind of stuff. So like your regular training in the gym, that doesn't count as the training she's talking about.
Like normal routine, healthy, active lifestyle training. It's very easy for me to start to realize I'm having too many carbs, or especially like simple carbs, is because I lose focus, and then my performance and my regular routine is just not up to par, because I'm feeling more dragged down and like heavy from my carbs, and I don't have like the long, like protein and fat is going to help you like extend your energy. It won't just be a burst as much. So you'll notice in your energy levels with that. At least I do.
I always use the word grounded. And I think, like if I'm not eating enough protein, I like how you describe it as lack of focus, but it's almost like thought loops. Like if I find my mind not being able to focus, but then also just like having constant thought loops, I'm like, oh man, like I need to get grounded. I mean, there are different ways to ground, but your nutrition is very important. in grounding your mind. So if you're finding yourself with a bunch of anxious thoughts, it could be as simple as like a protein deficiency, which is amazing.
Yeah, what you eat really affects you. And then another thing physically is like puffiness. I definitely get it in my face.
Yeah.
I know shortly after Christmas, well, at Christmas, I was like, my face does not look the same because I had all the carbs.
We're both post-Christmas. Our last episode or a couple episodes ago was talking about recovering from like getting off track at Christmas time. And we both talked about like the puffiness in the face. So if that's a thing for you, or even just start noticing it now, how carbohydrates affect that.
Yeah. The extra carbs and sodium can definitely make
I
it puffy.
notice it behind my arms too. Like that's one of the first places it goes. Does it go on?
My arms will do it too, and for me, my like abdominals, definitely. Those are like where I notice it.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, just different observations. Yeah. You start to be able to sense when you're off track, which is really great. Then you can get yourself back on track more quickly.
Yes, absolutely.
Good stuff. And then how can you tweak your macros for optimal performance? Do you have any tips for us?
Well, kind of like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to performance, you kind of have to feel it out. I know for me, because like I mentioned, if you have too many carbohydrates, they're going to drag you down. But if you don't have enough, you might not have the energy to perform well doing your activity. But if you're doing a regular like workout routine, honestly, you're probably not going to have too many problems with that. Just because I know from working with a lot of clients, this tends to be not getting enough protein. So that is a very common one. Something we want to focus on when it comes to performance is getting enough protein, because our body takes that protein and it breaks it down into branched chain amino acids that go into our bloodstream after it's broken down, and then our bloodstream delivers it to the muscles. And then that helps our muscles to rebuild and recover and repair. So we make these micro tears when we work out. Well, I'll try to not get too crazy into it, but we make micro tears in our muscles, and to recover from that, you need those amino acids that are broken down from protein to rebuild and recover.
Yeah, very good. So again, our main goal here is going for energy, and we're going for strength. That's what really defines health for us. So if your body is becoming stronger and you're becoming more energetic, then we are probably in the right zone for macronutrients. And the great thing is, we're all unique and individual, and we get to determine what is right for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that is it for today's episode. If you found it to be useful, please take a minute to rate and review the podcast. And we would love to talk to you more about your particular situation and help you strategize about ways to overcome obstacles. You can contact us with our information that will be in the show notes, and tune in next time for some more Becoming Unstoppable Fitness and Weight Loss.